religious Judaism is a satanic religion. Zionism is a satanic religion. Why? Because it rejects the Son. And if it rejects the Son, it rejects the Father. It's that simple.
Yo, 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 and welcome back to another episode of the Nyc and Griff Show. Today is Tuesday, September 24th. It's 5:06 p.m. Griff, what is on your mind today, brother?
What is on my mind is that my podcast partner told me that he was drinking lime sparkling water before we started, and I have a general problem with kind of all the additives of the world, if you would. That's why we're on the podcast. It's not just the sparkling water, it's the Dutch Bros, it's the sugar in the coffee. It's just like I just personally don't get it. I guess I can't really get after you for the sparkling water. I just think it's a little soft. You know what I mean? Like you don't need the bubbles and everything. I guess you're posh, you're fancy. It is what it is. You care to explain yourself is really more the question here.
No, I'm not going to explain myself to you, Griff. I'm not actually going to explain myself because I think that this sparkling water is delicious and it quenches my thirst after a long day of hard work. All right. A couple of things I'm thinking about, Griff. Man, the more that I dig into the word and the more that I dig into Bitcoin, there's so many parallels in understanding the two. Don't get it wrong. Don't get it twisted. Bitcoin is not God. We're not worshiping Bitcoin. Bitcoin is only a tool to be used for good or for bad. But man, so many parallels in understanding the two very deep and nuanced ideas.
Yeah, I mean, I could be propagandized pretty hard, right? But every 4 years we have this thing called an election and everything kind of gets more severe within the country. And that's where, I'm not going to say envy, but envy comes from my side of things on the Nyc and Griff Show, where Nyc is a little more unflappable when it comes to his path and like kind of what he's studying, what he's doing. Whereas I like the pop culture, the day-to-day podcast. I like the stories. I like to listen to the politics and everything. And Nyc is just crazy. Okay. It's just crazy. And Bitcoin is not God. But what I would say is, as somebody who's only been able to vote since 2016, it does represent a future that as a young person I can get behind. And that's why we do the podcast. I mean, at the end of the day, we had a great conversation earlier this week. And I was like, I just want freedom. And what freedom is to me is having enough capital to do what you want to do without the state messing with you. That's why we started the country kind of. I mean, like we could go British Empire on the whole thing right now, but that would be another 50 minutes. So we won't. But it's really interesting how Bitcoin popped up when we did most need it. So no, Max Kaiser, not Lord and Savior, the whole thing. I mean, he gets a little crazy, but so much respect to people who dig into their faith, because at times like these, I can imagine that becomes even more important because it's just like a lot of noise. And quite honestly, you can't read anything or study anything more honest than the Bible. It's going to tell you straight up what it thinks because it ain't going to change. Kind of like Bitcoin in a sense. It ain't going to change. Okay. That's what was said. There might be different translations here and there, whatever. I mean, get all conspiracy on it, but it's still a lot of truth. So
to your point, right? If I'm thinking of the scriptural base for the faith of Christianity, man, it's an anchor in what is a very volatile world. And I think that Bitcoin is very similar in an economic sense, in a very volatile economy with all kinds of fugazi stuff going on. I think Bitcoin can be absolutely an anchor financially. And I'm excited to have a conversation with a guy that's going to maybe blend these two topics. Alin Armstrong, the author of The Bible and Bitcoin. Happy to have you on the show, sir. How are you doing today?
I'm good today. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to what happens next.
Dare we open up with a question about what your hat is about? It says taxation is slavery. For those of you that are not watching, taxation is slavery. What does that mean?
Well, I mean, it's a controversial statement because of the two main words, taxation and slavery. Slavery, of course, has tremendous cultural baggage, as we know. And taxation is one of those things that will get you in trouble if you talk about it at all. As a matter of fact, we know that when the Pharisees and the enemies of Christ wanted to try to trip him up in his words, how did they try? Right? It was taxes. They conspired together. Let's talk about conspiracy for a minute. They conspired together in order to catch him in his words. And the conspiracy they thought would be best to do this is ask him this question: is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? That's, I mean, if you want to get someone in trouble, that's the question you ask. Hey, what do you think about taxation? Should we pay or should we not? So the phrase taxation is slavery. I actually have a t-shirt that says the same thing as well. And the scripture reference 1 Samuel 8:17. So people ask, what does the Bible say about taxes? And they go to render to Caesar, they go to Romans 13, but they don't go to 1 Samuel 8, which actually defines what it is. And in 1 Samuel 8, you'll see that the king that Israel was asking for, the human king, God is warning them and saying, this is what he's going to be like. And it says a bunch of things. He's going to send your sons to war. He's going to make your daughters his bakers and perfumers and so on and so forth. And then it ends by saying he will take a tenth and you will be his slaves. And so in that passage, the scripture is defining what taxation is. When a human king or institution or government takes part of your income, that is slavery. I didn't say it. God said it. God said he will take a tenth and you will be his slaves. So that's the idea behind taxation is slavery. It's a biblical statement that frames taxation the way that God frames it, as slavery.
Typically people don't start there, like they don't typically get to that conclusion right off the rip. How'd you kind of arrive at some of those conclusions? Is it just through your faith? Is it kind of a mix of economics and Bitcoin? Did you already have a finance background, or just like, how'd you get there?
Yeah, I didn't have a finance background. Before Bitcoin's the rabbit hole that opens this up for you because normie Christian teaching, normie evangelical teaching on taxation is just going to be, Jesus said, render to Caesar what is Caesar's. Paul says, to pay your taxes. And so we do it. We do it as good citizens, right? The generic teaching is you obey the laws of the land. And so the laws of the land say pay taxes. And so we do it. I was never really comfortable with that interpretation. I always thought there was something more going on. It just seemed a little bit too shallow, right? I mean, Jesus Christ, when he speaks with incredible depth of meaning, and there's lots going on. There's no really wasted words with Christ. There's always deep meaning there. And so when it comes to taxes, you really expect me to believe all he had to say was just pay? Really? Everything else he says is way deeper, and I don't know. It didn't sit right, but I left it and moved on. And then it wasn't until I got involved with Bitcoin, started learning about money, going down the rabbit hole of fiat and the history of money and so forth, that I decided to have a second look at this and took a more redemptive historical look. Now, for those who don't know what that means, it's basically you're just looking at biblical history from Genesis to Revelation, picking a theme or a topic and tracing it from the beginning to the end. I think it's an effective way to do Bible study. So I decided, let me look at taxes from Genesis to Revelation and see what comes out. And what came out was a very pronounced and clear theme. And it has less to do with taxes, actually. Taxes are sort of the effect of the cause, and the cause being a rejection of God as king. That's the crux of the matter. From Genesis 3, when Adam and Eve reject God as king, to Genesis 6 with the sons of God and people rejecting God, and the flood and the Tower of Babel, all of these events are pointing to a theme. Man keeps rejecting God, and God keeps coming back and redeeming and bringing them back into the fold. And it's not until you get to 1 Samuel 8, when the people of Israel are asking for a king, that taxes really becomes clear. Because God says, look, okay, you want a human king? Fine. He tells the prophet Samuel, don't worry about these people. They're not rejecting you. They're rejecting me. So this was a clear word from God that the people are rejecting him as king. And one of the consequences and judgments of rejecting God as king is God says the king who rules over you, he's going to tax you, and that will make you his slaves. And this is exactly what we see in the law of God when God says, if you don't obey me, if you reject me, what's going to happen is other people will come and rule over you, and they will steal, and they will be harsh with you, and so on and so forth. So taxation really is a residual judgment from God for rejecting him.
It's just like, wow, they hit on, I'm very interested. So from Genesis to Revelation, like when you do your studies around taxes per se, right? Do you at all look at some of the more non-biblical texts, or just like what was happening at that time as well? Like, do you take that into consideration? Or when you're studying a topic like that, is it completely just married to obviously the process of the Bible and just studying it through there?
Interestingly enough, in just sticking to the Bible, it ends up making sense of what else is going on. So I see the biblical narrative playing out. Mankind's rejecting God. God is dispersing. Like the Tower of Babel is a really central story to understanding this whole thing. The people reject God, and they want to build this tower, make a name for themselves under a king named Nimrod. God comes down, you know the story, and he disperses the people. And in Deuteronomy, it says that he dispersed them according to the number of the sons of God. So what's happening there is God sees that the people are uniting. And some people might think that's a good thing, but the problem was they were uniting under a human king, which was a representative of demonic powers. Okay. And so God says, okay, if they're going to unite, they're basically uniting to their own destruction. So God says, I have to disperse them. So he disperses them. And it says the judgment was according to the number of the sons of God. The sons of God were rebellious, fallen spirits. So God judges the nations by putting a rebellious demonic spirit over the nations, right? So each nation has this sort of demon god over them. Now, if you read about the history of humanity, you see all these nations all have their own god, right? They all have their own the pantheons and so forth. This is exactly what the Bible says happens. Why do the ancient peoples all have so many gods? Because God judged them with those spirits to rule over them. And if you notice, right after that, Genesis 12 goes right to Abraham. And God chose Abraham to make a new nation from him, to start afresh with Abraham, the people of Israel, in order to bring back the nations. That was the point of Israel, to bring the nations back so that he could make a nation from Abraham to be a shining beacon of light to draw the nations back from their rebellion.
Quick caveat to add there, if I may. Whenever you refer to Israel, you're not talking about the state Israel in terms of all the controversy today, but Israel in terms of kind of the Jewish people.
Right. Yeah. So Abraham is the father of the Hebrews, if you will. So yeah, I'm not talking about the modern state of Israel. I'm talking about. So I like to distinguish between Israelite and Israeli. Today we have Israelis. I'm talking about Israelites. And so, yeah, that was the whole point of it, was to draw the nations back to worship the true God. So all that background information is necessary, because what we see happening as history progresses is this exact thing. You have the Israelites with Yahweh, the true God, and then the rest of the nations with their gods, and they're kind of at each other's necks the whole time, right? And then when you get to Rome, it all kind of comes to a boiling point with the pantheon, and everything is sort of like, and then of course, is it any coincidence that that's when Jesus Christ comes and to set the record straight, to redeem humanity and so forth. So yeah, it's kind of a long-winded answer to say, yeah, when I found that when you understand the meta narrative of scripture, it really fits well with the rest of history and explains really what was going on.
I think a lot of this topic that we're talking about here is, to some degree, it's time preference in terms of how we're thinking about things, and I guess the horizon on which we're expecting results. You know, one thing that I was thinking about as we were kind of prepping for you to come on the show is kind of this Christian worldview that we may have, right? We talk about a focus on Christ. We're talking about a focus on an eternal spiritual plane. And I think that obviously impacts how we think about things in this life, and then ultimately the actions that we take. I think Bitcoin also does something similar in terms of lengthening out our time horizon in this life in an economic context.
Yeah, Bitcoin is it does something psychologically when you've grown up with only knowing fiat. And, with fiat, it's spend, spend, spend. Whether you know it or not, it might even be a subconscious thing where your money's losing value and you just spend right away. There's this consumer sort of mentality. Whereas with Bitcoin, it's scarce. It's the first asset we have with finality of supply. And so you really think twice about spending. Although I'm a proponent of spending Bitcoin, the reality is it does make you a little bit more hesitant to do so. You're not going to just buy some rinky-dink whatever just because you feel like you have to. It really changes your outlook, like you said, your time preference. And and that can have a negative effect too, in the sense that you never spend it, And maybe some people are like, yeah, that's a good thing. But for me, I'm like, well, the whole idea of money, the whole purpose of money is to save your time and energy and use it so that you can make the world a better place. But if you never use it, what's the point? If your life isn't better, if your children aren't better off, then really you're missing the point of money. We need to be careful and have a tremendously good discernment and balance with this thing, because we can get into a place where we just save forever and our lives suck and our families suffer because of it. But if we're wise, it can be a benefit. So it does make you think about time more, and at least for me, has given me an appreciation for scarcity of time. You don't want to waste it.
Griff, I've got to add a thought here, and I want to toss the mic back over your way. Something that we were just talking about, literally, I think yesterday, was this kind of interesting transitionary time where we're living and operating within this fiat world. We've got this Bitcoin thing that seemingly could very easily take over and become a kind of world standard at some point, right? But let's say that those are, let's say that fiat is now, and let's say that Bitcoin standard is sometime in the future. There's this kind of weird transition phase where you've got a lot of the sailors out there. How do we kind of having these conversations about kind of how do you blend the two? Which I think is a very interesting conversation. But something that you hit on there that we were just talking about yesterday was it seems like people have kind of lost this realization or awareness that the money that we have is a representation of our labor and our time being spent in the market producing value. I think obviously, right, we all have to consume some of the money that we earn today because we got to live, we got to eat, we got to have these certain things, right? But then whatever's left over, right? That's the question. That's the question of, okay, what are we doing here with this? Now, we could also talk about the incentive structures and how that gets twisted up, even in the earning and the consuming of the money. Very strange to kind of think about how there's a disconnect between I go and spend my time and then I apply my skill and understanding of whatever I'm doing. And in exchange for that, I get money. And I think to the point of, you made the point several times in your book, The Bible and Bitcoin, is that that's just a given, right? Most people, it's just like, oh, money's just money. Nobody really thinks about that. And that shouldn't really be the case, because I believe money is the lifeblood of an economy. Money does mean a lot. It's one of the most talked about, if not the most talked about topics in the Bible, one of them anyways. I mean, there's something there, we probably should have an idea of what some of these things are, but just wanted to throw a couple thoughts out there. Griff, you go.
You made a point though. You said nobody really thinks about money, or nobody really does. And then I'm thinking about the story of Babel and all these different tribes, and you have the Israelites and the real God and things like that. It seems like some of those tribes didn't understand what money was, or they're really good at money, and they're really good at doing what they want with money and kind of disguising it. Let's take it a little bit maybe to today, or through some of the study. What's going on? I mean, which tribe understood the money, and why are they so good at convincing everybody that the system that's existing today isn't, basically the worst system for, I want to say, just like middle class or just like normal people? It's the worst system ever. I mean, because it's so complex, not complicated, but it's very complex to the point where you have to do a lot of study to just get involved to even like know what the game is. And then you can continue to do even more study, and then it gets even more complex, and you're just like, all right, what's going on? Who knows how to get more out of the money than others? Is it the normal people, or is it a particular group that you can follow through the Bible? Because it seems like somebody today knows what the money is, and they're very good at getting what they want.
That's a good question. I think money, has evolved over time, and money is not supposed to be this complicated thing, right? You're supposed to just work, produce, add value, have families, so on and so forth. And if you do that, then you can continue. You read the book of Proverbs, and the wisdom about finances is very basic stuff, right? Like, he who gathers little by little increases much. Stuff like that, like your grandma's wisdom. Hey, save for a rainy day. Don't put yourself into debt slavery. These are things that are very basic, wise principles that the Bible espouses. Problem is, they don't work in the system we have. Right? The system we have is so broken and so backwards that basic financial wisdom doesn't work. Savers don't win, right? He who gathers fiat little by little does not increase much. He actually loses much in the long term.
Yeah.
So if you want to know what fiat money is like, take whatever the Bible says about financial wisdom and invert it, and that's the fiat system. And it's too bad, because a lot of preachers and Christian teachers, they teach these principles, and they're correct principles. They're correct principles when applied to real money. When applied to, if you apply it to the fake fiat money, it doesn't work. And here's the straw that broke the camel's back for me, was realizing that dollars are debts. Like, every dollar that comes into existence is debt to some degree.
Yeah.
How can a system that is literally debt work? How can it prosper? How can it be blessed? It can't.
Incoming super patriotic guy with a video of the U.S. military, and he goes, well, that's what it's backed by. And I go, well, that's great. Like, that's really good. Like, I'm really happy that you wave the American flag and you believe in freedom, and then like your first thing is to tell everybody how many nukes you have in your backyard. It's like, yeah, that's a great system. And then it's backed by a federal bank that buys the debt that they create, and then they kind of just trade it. And of course they're not colluding. I mean, that would be silly. But what you're saying is Dave Ramsey's an idiot. Is that kind of like in the realm of where we're at? Dave Ramsey is completely wrong, or
Dave Ramsey made a career on what he's done. He's not going to change now.
Yeah.
The incentives go both ways. He is not incentivized to backtrack on everything he's said and taught, because then all his products need to come off the shelf. Look, when it comes to Dave Ramsey, all he's good for is getting you out of consumer debt. That's it. If you're in a ton of consumer debt, okay, Dave Ramsey might be able to help you. Outside of that, it's outdated. It doesn't work. I have the Financial Peace University book. I took it back when I first got married. It literally says under the investment categories, he's got categories: good investments, bad investments. So once you get out of debt, then you're in wealth building mode. So he says, here's what you invest in, here's what you don't. Under the bad investment was gold.
I mean,
well, yeah. I mean, gold historically was the money. Gold won the money wars for thousands of years. Okay. And he's saying that is a bad investment. Having real money is a bad investment. That's all you need to know about Dave Ramsey.
It's really interesting, though, when it comes to the Dave Ramseys of the world, because we might take it as he's just being intellectually dishonest. But quite honestly, when you get down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, if you're not willing to start talking about Christ, if you're not willing to start talking about a lot of truths that just exist in the world, you kind of miss the point of Bitcoin. Because if you're really changing what money is, then it's going to be really hard to ignore a lot of other truths as well. That's kind of the promise of Bitcoin. Economically speaking, I hold it because it's a really great savings account. I don't know how long it's going to be a great savings account for. Maybe never. But then, you go and talk to some of the guys. Who was it yesterday? He asked me a question. He's like, I got 5 Bitcoin. He had an NFL contract, did really well. He's a real smart guy. He's come on over to Bitcoin, but he's like, well, if it went 50% down, he's like, I'm screwed. And I'm like, okay, well, then you have too much Bitcoin. You're like over leveraged, or you need to figure out how that doesn't need to be a thing. But I said, are you really screwed? I was like, you can still sell it and get whatever money you want from it. It's the most liquid capital in the world. And he's like, well, yeah, that is a good point. I'm like, so Bitcoin is extremely risk off because it isn't going to zero and the network is going to keep working. And then you just kind of go down the rabbit hole there. It's like, you either hit people with that or you don't. When you start explaining, I'm not in Bitcoin for the price appreciation. It is a nice side benefit. I'm in it because I don't have to trust it. Like, that's the whole point. And with everything else we're talking about, it's just a whole lot of trust, which leads me into a fun topic on Bitcoin today. Does your Bitcoin need to produce yield, Pastor Coin? Does it need to produce yield, or does it not need to produce yield? Does that matter? Is that even an intelligent question? I feel like when I ask it, I'm like, that just feels stupid to ask. But here we are. Do you need yield on Bitcoin in order for Bitcoin to work?
I don't know how you get yield from Bitcoin. How does that even happen? Bitcoin is not Bitcoin is money, right? It's not supposed to yield anything.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, it's a lot of the conversation. I don't know if you paid attention to the Sailor versus Safety, and they had a podcast recently. It's just so interesting because the Sailor thing, it's like you love them, and everybody loves their Bitcoin heroes until they do something like that. But it's almost like Sailor's big enough to where even some of the more legitimate Bitcoin crowd is like, well, yeah, it does need to produce.
What's he saying? So you can put your Bitcoin in a bank and then they give you fiat?
Some form of fiat, some form of something. Right. Yeah, 100%. Because I was going down the rabbit hole with Nick, and Nick was like, well, if I lend half a Bitcoin and I get a Bitcoin and a half back, like, lending makes sense. I'm like, that's not what they're talking about. They're talking about essentially perpetuating the system we're in today. So if there's, $700 quadrillion worth of wealth in the world, they're envisioning a world where there's, infinity. I mean, just like quadrillions and quadrillions worth of crap that's in the world denominated in some state-backed whatever. And then Bitcoin is that universal collateral for everybody.
If a bank came out tomorrow and said, listen, if you deposit Bitcoin with us, we'll give you like 20% monthly. I would take a small portion of what I have, put it in there, and buy Bitcoin with the 20%. And it's a situation where if I lose it, I didn't put, I'm not putting enough. Like, if I'm going to put something in there that if I lose it, my heart won't break. I won't really care. A small amount, no big deal. I'm not putting my whole stack. Right? That's insane. But something like that. If someone wants to do that, go ahead. Sure, that's not what Bitcoin's for. But if you can leverage a little bit of it, and whatever, it is what it is. I wouldn't recommend. I probably wouldn't even do a little bit, to be honest. But I think the whole idea is like, eventually you got to ask the question, where's the yield coming from? Okay, so I deposit the Bitcoin in my local bank, and then they're giving me fiat. Like, I guess they could just print it, I suppose. But then what's the point of them holding the Bitcoin? Like, it's very sketchy. It's very Sam Bankman-Fried-esque. Yep. Maybe I'm too stupid to understand. Maybe there's some mechanisms I'm missing, but I just don't understand. Bitcoin's not meant for that. It's a peer-to-peer electronic cash. Keep it simple.
Griff tweeted earlier and said something I think it makes a ton of sense, because we had a long conversation about this topic yesterday. And I think we came actually to a pretty good conclusion. And that was what Griff tweeted earlier. And that is that yield equals trust. Right. Hey, you can go get your yield. If you want to go find some places to go get go do your deal. But now you've got to trust that entity. And right. You got to trust that whatever they're doing is what they say that they're doing. And, because I work in the development industry, I'm on the construction side, and work with a lot of developers that are taking investor capital. They're developing real, physical buildings, things like that. They're leasing those spaces to businesses, and they're generating capital based on that investment. Okay, like, I can understand a lending in that sense. But whenever it's like, hey, I'm just going to your point, right, is at some point we got to ask, okay, well, where's the yield coming from, right? And if it's, if you're working with a local group, what's kind of going on, that's, that makes sense to some degree. But I think the use case for money is to store and transfer economic value. If it's doing that, that's the use case. And just so happens that up until, 2009, we didn't have an ability to do that in a non-physical way, because in a physical world, you have the centralization issue, right? Gold is like the best example of what that looks like. But then how do you grow and scale an economy, a global economy? I'm not a globalist, right? But I think that we're always going to have, we got a whole world of natural resources, production, human capability. It's always, now with the internet, with technology the way it is, it's always going to be interconnected. There's no way that you can do that with a physical good and be as efficient as we can sit here and have a podcast. Where are you at in the world, Pastor Coyne?
I'm in Canada.
Okay, I'm in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Griff's in Sacramento, California. How could we have done this if it weren't for the internet? Okay, so now if we're doing this, we're doing business over the internet. We got to have a digitally native money, because if not, then whatever money it is that we're using on the internet is supposed to be tied to some other real value. Then I think that we run into the exact problems that we're in today, where Griff's made a point a couple of times to talk about the difference between complicated problems and complex problems. Complex problems are just really intricate, right? You can dig down to the bottom of it. Complicated problems are like, we don't know what in the hell's going on. Mm-hmm. And I think that, I don't know, it seems like the whole fiat system is maybe some mix between the two.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, just to add to it, here's the thing about the money with the Bitcoin thing and it needing to have some utility. I think Jack Mallers actually puts it better than anybody else. If money is a technology, planes are a technology. Okay, well, if everybody believed you could fly on a banana, go ahead and fly on your banana plane. You're going to die. You will crash and die. And the people who believe in plane, they will fly and they will get there. And that's great. The same thing with money. If it does need some utility in the world, and if all these Bitcoiners are wrong and everything, well, we're going to fall flat on our face. Go ahead, whatever. And it's so interesting because yield isn't just introduce trust. Yield is always borrowing from the future. It doesn't matter. Yield is always borrowing from the future. And what they're trying to say, and I think I understand well enough to say this, basically what Saylor's doing is he's like, I was the big bald guy who came in and I just started getting free debt and buying Bitcoin. Look at me. I'm like the strongest guy in Bitcoin. I'm the smartest guy in the world, whatever. And now he's turning into a giant pussy, because at the end of the day, if you need yield or you need something where it's like, I don't just want to give up what I deem to be this piece of Manhattan, right? I don't want to give up my real estate. What I want to do is get a loan for the real estate and then go use that money to go get more money. And I go, that is the exact problem that we have today. It doesn't fix anything. So in my opinion, all of your Bitcoin heroes, all of the BlackRocks, all of the Coinbases, whatever, Bitcoin will get them. That's my theory about it all. Yeah. That's what I think the risk is. Bitcoin will get them because they might be able to do it for a while. And I'm talking tens, decades, centuries. Maybe for a while. I don't know. Here's the thing about Bitcoin. I can always self-custody it. Everybody on this podcast can self-custody it. Everybody listening can self-custody it. So you're always at risk of a bit run or a bank run. Yep. And that I think is the interesting part, because it's just at the end of the day, I don't care what anybody says in Bitcoin. The only reason why you're rooting for yield is because now you've been in Bitcoin long enough to where you're a system guy. You like the system. Let's make this system work a little bit better for the people up top, because of course we know better. And again, I just like you said, maybe I'll put a little bit into it. But at the end of the day, I just want to stack sats. I want a dollar cost average into it, because that's what I get paid in. And I'm going to hold it. And we're going to see when that purchasing power actually takes up a meaningful effect in my life. It already has. I just still don't want to use it. So it is what it is. But I think that's breaking it down for you. I think that's, they're just trying to de-risk what is the most risky thing in the world, which is lending out money for a business practice. The business either does well or it fails. We need to get back to a society where if you put money in it and it fails, you failed. Sorry. I don't know what else to tell you. That's business. Yeah. I think.
I tend to think Bitcoin tends towards purity, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Bitcoin, another way I put it is Bitcoin will punish you if you're dishonest in the long term. And so, FTX is a great example of that. They were being shady and they got away with it for quite a while. But when they couldn't get away with it any longer, it was just a merciless onslaught. Bitcoin had no mercy. There is no bailout. There's nothing. If you're lying about Bitcoin and with the Bitcoin you have and you're running a business like FTX, once it's found out, Bitcoin will murder you. It will be relentlessly merciless to you, and your business will collapse, and you'll end up in the jail cell with P. Diddy. And that's exactly what happened to Sam Bankman-Fried. I just saw today that apparently he's cellmates with P. Diddy now, or they're in the same block or something. Anyways,
Lots of cucumbers.
it doesn't end up well for you. So this is the same thing I'm seeing here with Saylor and BlackRock. They might get away with it for a while, but man, if they're not careful, oh my gosh, Bitcoin will mercilessly humble them, and it won't be pretty. And the problem is, Bitcoin will humble them and come back, right? It's not like it'll humble them and they'll destroy the system. The system will just destroy them and then come back stronger later. So that's the thing, man. Bitcoin is a really interesting technology in how it is. The incentives are like almost too perfect that I don't know that there's a way you can destroy this thing other than maybe you buy every Bitcoin on the market and you burn your keys. Then it's over. And aside from that, I don't know.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting because a lot of people look at the halving cycles and the price action of Bitcoin. And generally speaking, it's just too early. And you could call for price suppression for the last 14 years because every crash is tied up into some exchange that decided to get a little frisky and do things they weren't supposed to do. And Bitcoin came crashing down. So therefore, that's going to keep happening, whether it be every 4 years or the same timing every single time or whatever. I think that's for Bitcoin to decide because it doesn't care. I mean, it's just going to do what it does. But I think in our lifetime, I think the actual exciting aspect of it is if, Trump comes in and some of these things happen and they really do start going like, well, we're going to do a little Bitcoin. We're going to add the Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin's like a Trojan horse in that way where it's like, oh, I'm the parent in the room that's never going to leave. So once it's in there, it's always going to be there. And at the end of the day, I actually hope that we continue to see the volatility in Bitcoin because that means there are some very large financial players that could get very humbled over the next 2 decades or so, which is, as a small guy, we got to root for because at the end of the day, I don't like that Saylor's borrowing free money and buying Bitcoin. I don't. I think it's great for my price now. It's fun to talk about. But what he's doing is he's trying to create a system backed by Bitcoin, which in essence creates a trust barrier even within Bitcoin where it might be better than today, but it's very similar to what we're doing today. You know what I mean? I mean, it's just like
one more thing before we transition. When FTX crashed, I saw it as a very good thing. And the reason was I told because people were like, Alin, Bitcoin's crashing. Oh my, what do I do? What do I do? I said, okay, why is it crashing? Ask the question, why? Oh, it's because of some dishonest shenanigans going on a large scale. Okay. All that means is Bitcoin's working.
Yeah.
All that means is Bitcoin is working. It's honest, and this should happen. And it's good that this is happening, and it's better, and it'll strengthen the network. So that's how I see it. If these things happen, all it is a testament that Bitcoin is working and is honest. That's all it is for me.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah, that question of why is something that I think very few people are really asking critically, especially in some of these topics, right? I mean, this question of what is money? A lot of what we're talking about here is a principle that is all throughout the Bible. It's the principle of sowing and reaping. Mm-hmm. We could go down the long laundry list of references in the scripture. If you're doing something that's dishonest, you're going to get found out. If you're doing something that's right, don't grow weary in doing that good. For the proper time, you'll reap a harvest if you don't give up. And I think what Bitcoin does, right? Again, we could draw all these parallels. And man, it's like that principle of sowing and reaping is powerful, and it's very apparent with Bitcoin in an economic sense.
And it's too bad that so many people have seen all these crashes and all the corruption in the different scams that have been around Bitcoin, and they see that and they go, "Wow, Bitcoin's a scam," not realizing that it's actually not a scam, and the evidence is not a scam is the fact that it did crash after all these shenanigans happened, right? So they're like, look at the price, what a scam. Dig a little deeper and you'll see it's actually the most honest financial instrument we've ever had.
Rarely do things that aren't worth a lot make double all-time highs in Bitcoin, a la Ethereum. Haha, you smart people that you all are doing that. I would love to ask, though, since I got you here on the taxation and stuff thing, there is also this family, they're the Rothschild family, or they run the Zionist party, or in the book of Jekyll Island, there's just somebody from the Red Bank that nobody can name. It's just like this guy, right? It's like looming around. And where I'm at with it is in 1813, the London Stock Exchange crashed. And, you know, the British government didn't have a lot of money. They needed to get bailed out at that time as well. Not only right before World War I, when they didn't have enough money to go fight that, they had to go recruit money from these bankers. And those bankers have always been there. So the bankers, aka the Zionist Party, you know, they had their influence in the British Empire. I mean, more or less, they were running the show towards the end. And here we are in America practicing a lot of the same stuff. And, you know, we don't want to get too, I guess, involved in what's going on today, but there is this state of Israel that is a major problem. And I only say it's a problem because there's a lot of biblical testament to, like, maybe they shouldn't be there, or maybe they don't have the claim that they're making. Then you have, you know, World War II and the Holocaust to hide behind, and the reason that they need it, and the reason they need to go blow up people's cell phones, which, by the way, is the scariest thing ever. I can't believe that actually happened. And I watched that video. I said, it could happen to me because of my memes. You know what I mean? If I have a bad meme one day, that's probably, you know, it's coming my way, apparently. But it's just so interesting, right? This family, this party that, in my opinion, does kind of disguise themselves as Jews. And so I feel like this is a fair question to ask you, because I don't know a better person to ask. Are the Israelites that you were talking about that weren't worshiping a false god, are they still, is that who the Jews are today? Is that the state of Israel, or are those two totally different people?
Big old can of worms right there.
So
I know, but
you're going to get me in trouble with some and make others love me. But it's okay, because I've already made this very clear on Twitter. So by now, everyone should know where I stand. It's my opinion, and I think I have enough evidence to back this up, that Israelis and Israelites are not the same people group. Now, like I said, some people are going to love it, some people are going to hate it. My beef is not with necessarily the people group. Okay, so you have a group of people who say today they are Jews. They will say, I'm a Jew, I'm a son of Abraham, I'm a daughter of Abraham, I could trace my lineage to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Okay, I don't know how one could do that, but even if you grant it, sure, grant that that's the case. That doesn't mean that these are the people of God. Now, one might say, why not? Look, I didn't say it. Jesus said it. Okay. Jesus, when he was talking with the religious elite of his day, because the reality is many Jews, ethnic Jews, follow Jesus. The majority of his disciples were ethnic Jews. But when he was talking with the Judean elite, what the Bible calls the Jews, he told them, you are of your father, the devil. So, okay, what does that mean? I think it's pretty clear. You read in the book of Revelation, he talks about the Jews who are persecuting the Christians. He calls them the synagogue of Satan. And so when Jesus is talking with these guys, he doesn't necessarily, I don't think he categorizes them by ethnicity. He categorizes them by spiritual standing. Either you're a son of God or you're a son of Satan. This is how Jesus sees it. And he said to the Jews of his day, you reject me, therefore you reject my Father. If you don't reject my Father, then you would have accepted me, because I come from the Father. Therefore, it's evident that you are sons of the devil. And so this is the same thing going on now. Now, religious Judaism is a satanic religion. Zionism is a satanic religion. Why? Because it rejects the Son. And if it rejects the Son, it rejects the Father. It's that simple. So this whole theology about the Jews and their land, building a temple with an antichrist, and this whole thing. Now, first of all, I don't see it in the Bible. And you can have a discussion about that. I don't see it there. I think there's a strong case for it. Most of church history didn't believe such a thing. The temple, Jesus said he was going to destroy the temple and raise it in 3 days. He was talking about his body, of course. But when the Jewish temple was destroyed in 70 AD, it was destroyed for a reason, and that's because there is no need of a temple anymore, because the people of God are the temple of the Holy Spirit now. And so God himself is the one that destroyed the temple. Let's not get this twisted. People think it was the Romans. No, it was God who did it. He prophesied it would happen, and he did it because the temple is not needed anymore. There's a once for all sacrifice. There's no sacrifices anymore. Jesus is the high priest. That whole system of of religion is fulfilled in Jesus Christ now. We don't need it. So if people claiming a Jewish religion build this temple and start offering sacrifices, what they're doing is actually rejecting the cross. They're actually saying, no, we don't want the cross of Christ. We want to sacrifice animals. We think the blood of bulls and goats is what gives us forgiveness. It's a rejection of Jesus. And it's blasphemy, actually. It's quite blasphemous to do that because you're rejecting your salvation.
But even to you, there is a distinction even between just Jews and the elite within the group that calls themselves Jews. It's like some people seem to be just like in it, and it's like kind of to your point. It's like, man, nothing you're saying really makes any sense. Like, why are you following this? And then there's obviously, it feels like there's people that know that it's satanic. Like they're very understanding of like what they are doing. It's intentional. They don't really try to hide it. I mean, a lot of the things that go on with the satanic rituals and like when you see it on TV and things like that, I think it goes to the ethos is like they can't hide it. So it's like part of their steez. Like they have to show you. And here we are today, you know, just like rejecting Christ, going right within, you know, all the lending practices. We have more taxes now than you're getting quadruple taxed on everything. Yep. You need a credit card to just pay your car bill because you don't get paid till the next month. And that's when the actual money hits your account. I mean, everything we're doing today doesn't make any sense whatsoever unless you go, somebody won, you know, or somebody prevailed in spreading their beliefs throughout the world. And it's hard for me to say whether or not they're still winning, but it does seem like the Overton window on these discussions, as we actually talked about it on the podcast, which I've been wanting to talk about from podcast 1 because I've already been there. I think that's good. You know, I like Kanye West. Sorry, everybody else. I know he's probably done a lot of bad things, but I don't
know. Like, I don't know if there's like a Jewish banker cabal or anything like that.
Fair.
I don't really think of it in those terms.
Yeah.
I think of it more in terms of like light, the kingdom of light and the kingdom of darkness.
Yeah.
And there's no doubt in my mind, modern Judaism is the kingdom of darkness. The religion. I'm sure there's plenty. I mean, most, you know, I posted about Hanukkah last year, you know, because I believe that the menorah is a Christian symbol. Because in Revelation chapter 1, it says that Jesus stood in the midst of 7 golden lampstands. Well, what is the seven golden lamp? What is that? It's a menorah. It's 7 golden lampstands. So Jesus uses that imagery of the 7 golden lampstands to represent his church. So it's a Christian symbol. And so I posted a menorah on Twitter and just had a bunch of Jewish people descend on my comments. Stop cultural appropriation. Give us back our thing, blah, blah, blah.
So weird.
And I'm like, whoa, chill out. And I'm clicking on these profiles and they got like pronouns, rainbow flags, trans flags. I'm like, what? I'm like, wait a minute. I thought you were Jews. We are. I'm like, have you read like Leviticus 18, like anything about, you know, maybe Genesis 1, he made the male and female. Are you familiar with this stuff in your writings? But a lot of them are what's called secular Jews.
Yep.
Where they're not even religious.
Yeah.
They're just people who claim lineage, a Judaic lineage, and reject everything about their forefathers' scriptures. So it's a very strange thing, and it's a rabbit hole in itself. But
Alin, I think we could go on forever. I've got several other topics I would love to have gotten to, the counterfeit beast system and the real great deception. I don't know if you're familiar with E511 Ministries, but some really interesting stuff in there. You've had a couple of really good quotes. I just want to say this one. You said in your first book, The Bible and Bitcoin, what I needed was a theological understanding of time, value, and money. Really good, really good. Where can the people get connected with you?
Pastor Coin it up, baby.
Yeah. Twitter at Pastor Coin. That's where I'm most active. Although I'm being shadow banned like crazy lately, and I think a lot of people are. It's the election. If you're not tweeting about the election, no one sees anything. But yeah, you can go find me there. On my website, thebibleandbitcoin.com. You can buy copies of my books at a discount, but you must pay in Bitcoin. I only accept Bitcoin, and that's on purpose. It's just actually better. So. Yeah, you can find me there, bibleandbitcoin.com at Pastor Coin. Sign up for my newsletter, and you can get the first chapter of my new book coming out September 30th for free. So go check that out.
What's the title of the new book?
It's called Render to God, Christ's Dominion and Human Taxation.
I can't wait to dig into that. Alin, thank you for coming on the show. We'll have to have you on for another one to dig deeper into some of these things. Hope you have a great rest of the week, man.
You too. Thanks.
Another fun one.
We say this every time. It's a joy to bring on intelligent people that know their shit, and it's really cool to learn from other people, because I said this recently, like I think I've found out over the last couple of years, or maybe this is just me getting into Bitcoin. I've definitely become a solutions-oriented person, not a just bring my problems to the table person. So when somebody says something to me that hits in my head or whatnot, a lot of like what you do, or like what just happened over the last 55 minutes, it's worth more time. So bringing somebody on like that is so great, because now I'm like, you know what? It's like there are things that I need to go study, and some things are more important than others. And a lot of the time our guests, because of this podcast, kind of lead me there, which is so great. Thank you again to everybody who listens, who for some reason listens and continues to listen. We love you. We are going to keep bringing on guests, keep talking our shit. But at the end of the day, we're just going to keep learning. We're not going to put ads in your life. We're never going to make a dime off the damn thing. But it seems like a few more of you kind of like it. So keep on watching. You know what I mean? I like it. It's good.
Hey, if you guys are not watching, we do have video on Spotify and on YouTube. And we love to talk with people on X. It is at Nyc Griff Show, all spelled out. And you can find all of our links at nycandgriffshow.com. It's spelled NYCANDGRIFFSHOW. See you next time. Peace.